Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the delayed cabinet from September the 14th, delayed due to the sad passing of Her Majesty. Some of this tonight will be not news to anyone, but if we can move forward at a pace, that'd be very helpful. Right, apologies for absence for anyone. Okay, and then minutes of the cabinet held on the 13th of July 2022. Agreed. Any matters of urgent business? At this time, there is some urgent business. No, there's no matter. Any declarations of interest? Do we care for anything we're discussing tonight? No, this is really good. Statement from the leader. But first of all, I'd like to welcome Mr. Councillor Snell. Over the years, we've had many disagreements. I'm looking for, but it now is more important than ever to have a critical friend in this cabinet, and I fully welcome you. I think even last year when you was chair of challenging me with my PTR and thing, I thought that was well worth it, and you're a worthy addition to this cabinet, I can promise you, and I think it's really helpful. You've taken the finance portfolio. That was a very first offer without sort of thinking about it, and I think that was a statement of the man himself to actually take a very serious brief and bring a challenge to that in these difficult times. Thank you. One of my first actions as acting leader was to welcome the government intervention. This was to reset and bring a new era of transparency, openness and honesty to this council. There's two important parts to the intervention: the best value inspection and the recovery plan, both of which was did Secretary of State by the 3rd of January 2023. The recovery plan is what we're working on now, myself and the acting leader, and I will keep Cabinet members and residents updated regularly at these meetings as a point on the agenda item. The independent best value inspection has started with interviews this week. Myself has been interviewed and some other Cabinet members, and the acting chief executive has as well. But it's unlike an Ofsted or any other inspection. There is no overall framework, and it's assessing the organisation. It's to assess the organisation compliance and general best value and duties of the local authority. As such, the approach the inspectors may change over time, and as they find more findings out, and I'm sure more will come out during the inspection than what's come out already. The outcome of the Best Value Inspection report will be published on the gov.uk and will set out the inspectors' recommendations that they will make into the Secretary of State. Again, unlike any other inspection, there is no clear classification, so there's no good requires improvement, but there will be some recommendations which I promise you we will take in full with no arguments and move forward, because that's the only way we can get through this difficult time. I'm pleased, and I urge all Cabinet members, staff and residents, if they ask, to be open when interviewed, to be open and honest. This is the only way we can start a recovery and make Thurrock the best it can be. As part of openness and transparency and honesty, you'll be hearing a lot of that from me. I've offered the chairs of the committees to the opposition, and I will go into more detail tomorrow night at full council. But inside here, part of that as well, is scrutiny. I have here as an important role of good decision making in these meetings, and I expect all Cabinet members to take the views of owners seriously, give consideration to them, and if it needs more time to make a good decision, we should take more time. Nothing should be rushed through just because we've got this date here. And if we should delay, but give a good reason to it. And if ONS want more time, give them more time. And with that, I think it's enough of that statement. Thank you very much. And then we can move on now to any briefings, policy or other issues. There is some on the next meeting, but not this one. Is there any issues anyone wants to bring up? Petitions from member of the public. I'm asking.
No petitions tonight.
Right. Any questions from non-executive members?
No, none tonight, Councillor.
A shame. Any matters referred to Cabinet for consideration of overview and scrutiny?
No, not other than those in the agenda, none.
No, thank you very much. And then is the Lower Test Crossing Task Force update, which we do have a member from the opposition here, and I'm very glad he's been a regular attender, and hopefully he can be more in the previous one as well very shortly.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Cabinet and everyone. I'm going to start from March 2022. Task Force had a verbal update on the A13 junction, which was mentioned in Cabinet at my last report back. Officers reported that the impact of the Lower Thames crossing on the A13 and the A1089. It's reported you could see an increase in traffic on the A13 at peak local times. Also, our recent construction has been carried out on the A13 has impacted local villages. This disruption would continue if the LTC, Lower Thames Crossing, proceeds as planned. The impact of the LTC on other local roads, such as at the Manaway Junction and the B1420 and Southend Road, were also reported by officers, which are expected to have a substantial increase in traffic flow on these routes. The Interim Assistant Director for Regeneration and Place Delivery stated that the LTC would use local road capacity and would impact the Council's ability to deliver on the local economic growth aspirations, such as the Thames Freeport and the emerging local plan. The task force discussed who would be responsible for any future decision to perhaps trunk the A13 to the Manaway, and was informed by officers this would be a Department of Transport decision. It came to light in the discussion that Thurrock's main local movement times differ to the strategic national times used by national highways, which shows larger peaks in the evenings. The resident representative for Task Force felt that the impact on villages such as Linford, East Tilbury, Chadwell, St Mary and others had not been fully addressed by national highways. This brought a wider discussion regarding other projects going on in and around Thurrock and the impact on the capacity of the local network. Overall, the Task Force remains concerned regarding the negative impacts of LTC and junction connectivity with the Orsett and Manaway and other connecting roads. The health impact assessment was discussed again, but once again, we are still waiting for answers and baseline data. The Task Force continues to feel frustrated with the lack of information from National Highways on this, but we do hope to see more information presented soon. At the next meeting, the Task Force discussed an item of urgent business, the Thurrock Council letter to the Treasury, as the value for money for the proposed LTC has appeared to decrease. The Task Force broadly welcomed the letter and the points raised in it made and discussed in Task Force over recent years. The only other report was related to the Thurrock Council's LTC local refinement consultation response. Officers reported they felt the consultation had too few physical events around the route and the duration was not long enough, amongst other issues. Concerns from the task force were debated, including the impact of the A13 junctions, tunnelling the spoil, HGVs on local roads and the Tilbury Field size reduction as some of the main concerns going forward. The next task force meeting is scheduled for the 17th of October, where National Highways will be in attendance, I believe in person, to present and take questions from members of the task force, and alongside a planned DCO verbal update and also an important request for information on the health impact assessment update. That concludes this brief update on LTC to Cabinet.
Thank you very much. It's sounding very brief. I must say, as Chair, what the Lower Thames Crossing, we've had my disagreements when I was the Strategic Highways and working with the Lower Thames Crossing. It's been a task force. It's been a sea change with that and the work that has been done there and the actual constructive work that with the officers and myself, and I've found it invaluable from what the report's coming back to actually go forward. And we can talk about the next item that I've got coming up about the delegated authority as we move forward to this, but the work there, I think, has been amazing work that your task force has done at the moment, and it's a testament that we're just not talking about it's constructive criticism with good reasons and showing our local road network. This Lower Thames Crossing will make a big impact. During construction, a terrible impact, and then afterwards, no gain to our businesses in the area, really, constructive, and actual lengths. And now, we've seen now the kilometre long minimum at certain times of the day after we on our local road networks, not their strategic network, our local road networks. It's just unacceptable that even their traffic modelling says that. And I hope you've pushed them when they're doing. And I beg this last way, just give it a bit more time, listen to what we're saying, the constructive criticisms are now, and move forward as we are a critical friend, like we want to be here today. I'm mentioning it once again. We're a critical friend of National Highways. That's what we want to be. But push forward this and no doubt we will be objecting right the way through with our business as well, because a £10 billion project needs to help the borough of Thurrock, and at the moment this doesn't.
I echo those words, Chair. Thank you.
Any other comments from anyone about the Lower Thames Crossing to your ward? Or thank you. Well, I thank you for the report, and I look forward to the next one, and give them hell. We move on now to Lower Thames Crossing Delegated Authority. It's disappointing to have to bring this report because they're rushed again. Like you just heard, I believe they're not the Lower Thames Crossing is not ready to be implemented to a DCO, and it should go back to a wider consultation. It's fundamentally changed since their last major consultation, and instead of minor consultations, they go back. And if they listen to our officers, listen to what the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force are doing, we would not need this. But it looks like it's coming in, and we need to be ready and fleet of foot. And this is where I'm asking Cabinet for today to delegate authority. It's slightly changed. I'm acting leader. I may not be acting leader next tomorrow, so we've got to wait for the vote. But it's obviously leave the decision as it was, just in case. But I really would appreciate any comments around now, but we should, just to be fleet of foot in this decision, and I'm not going to read the recommendations out, but it's a long recommendation, but really it means it's just we're delegating to myself as Cabinet member and the Director to actually move as we need necessary to move forward. Was there any comments on the paper? Important paper, no. Anyway, so can we move forward? Would you any decisions? Agree? So I read the agreed. Thank you very much. We can then move on to the next item, which is mine again. So you're having a lot of me tonight. This is the Grays Towns Board item on page 27 to 38. This is a good news story to moving forward at pace. I've been informed we still need this. It does actually mention dates, but because of the sad passing of Her Majesty, this is why this is late. But this is the government. Obviously, we do need to still pass this hurdle and move forward with the Grays Towns Board programme. The Grays Towns Board, if you're not aware of it, it's a fantastic opportunity with a new beachfront vista, which I was at the Thames 100 Environment Agency display yesterday, and they were excited about it. Outside the City of London, they said this is the first time that it's delivering the values of Thames 100 to actually the foreshore, and we're only so I think that's quite a feat that out of all the authorities on the Thames estuary, we're the second authority to be doing this to their foreshore. That is a great news story, I think, as well. It's fantastic, because I think it's a detriment to the task force and the hard work they've put forward in here. And I know it's been hard work because I sit on it. And it's a mixture of public sector and private sector partners. The thing that I'm most excited about, and I will bang about, is the Riverside Activity Centre. It says on there there is a cost, and in the financial situation we're in at the moment, obviously, and the decisions you took in July, Cabinet, about not having any more buildings and releasing buildings to the community. I think this building shouldn't come back to the community. It should go straight to the community. We should not be owning it and leasing this out or owning it. That's a decision, I think. But my personal favourite, there's been 12 years now without a home to the Sea Cadets. The Sea Cadets are fantastic, with nearly 50 young children being trained there. We've got a home for the Air Cadets in Grays. We've got a home for the Army Cadets. There's no home for the Sea Cadets. They've been homeless for many years, dry. And you've seen them in your community. You see them at every event. They're a great thing, and I think they will be a great lead tenant for that area. And I'm hoping we can move forward with a home for them at the end of this, so we get a nice foreshore and a river activity centre with people who want to do the water. I think it's a great synergy to have the Sea Cadets in there, and I hope we can move forward to that at a pace. We have to complete by 2026-27, I think, unless that's changed with that. So it'd be great news to sit there in a few years' time to see construction started. Comments?
As someone that's advocated that, that there's no great future for a lot of the retail, that there's no way that we're going to drastically revolutionise the retail offering in Grays High Street. It's just a basic reality because of Lakeside and things like that. I've long called for it to become a leisure zone, and the problem was always, how do you finance that? How do you get the partners? And this grant has made that a reality. And I think if done well, and it has to be done well, it's a massive project, it will be absolutely transformative for this town. And there's a negativity around this town, and it's a negativity that comes from the evidence in front of people's faces. I mean, when you look at, I remember going to the History Association, and the people there were very reminiscent about how Grays used to be better. And you look at these photos and all the activities, the cinemas, the beaches, the swimming pool, and it's true, Grays was better. But this gives us the opportunity to rediscover those memories that these people are still remember, and give these memories to our children. And I'm really, really excited about this.
Thank you. Yeah, it's part of the regeneration plans, and I've been very excited about it. It's been taking too long for Grays, but we're sitting in the building as part of the regeneration. We're sitting opposite that in the last administration delivered a fantastic service to young people in the South Grays. This is an extra addition to South Grays to bring their leisure opportunities into Grays Beach Park. It's fantastic, and opening up the beach. We've got the underpass coming, and there'll be a planned application end of this year, early next year, to move forward on there. And then we've got the new river developments, exciting plans to bring in a new square and new developments right the way up. And then we've got some exciting opportunities in Thameside, which to make sure that has a sustainable future. And that's coming soon. And I think that means Grays will change. But it's the doing and actions that people want to see. Because when I moved here, it's depressing. And it's depressing when you come out all the time. I don't go to Grays now. And that's all you hear in your wards. And that's what we've got to change. And it's both in South Grays connected to the rest of the High Street, and the re-change of that. And I think in 5-6 years' time, there's going to be transformational to Grays. In fact, what we're going to get is, why can't we have that in our area? Because Grays has got everything we're going to be hearing. And we've got to then think about the others, especially your ward in South Ockenden needs some regeneration and needs some attention. It's been missing, and it's one of my priorities of regeneration, to make sure regeneration is across the 5 regeneration zones here that we got given by the Development Corporation. And we've got to think about that more across it. But Grays is the priority. It's deliver first, and we can move on to others.
Thank you, Leader. I think the regeneration of Grays was long overdue, and this will positively transform, Grays. And we are really looking forward to the construction work. Thank you.
I have the permission then to as written, the recommendations. There is a slight delay, obviously, like you're saying, but these are still needed for the.
Sorry, I just wanted to welcome the news that the Sea Cadets are getting a home. We all attended recently when the Mayor reintroduced a Sea Cadet to carry the mace. He was a credit to his organisation, so I think it's been long in the coming, but welcome that they've now got a new home.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the cadet mace carrier tomorrow night from our illustrious Mayor. We can move on. That's all I say. To the recommendations, I won't read them all out. They're on page 27 and 28. Are we all in agreement, Cabinet? Thank you very much. We can. And then move on to, and I welcome my new Cabinet members in at the deep end. Are you? Oh, you don't have. Oh, okay then. So as it's I wouldn't let you do that. So it's in at the poor old Jonathan. I think Jonathan, you gave this report last week to ONS, so we can actually report back. List ONS and
Thank you, Chair. This report is the Q1 finance report. This was due to come obviously in September, and obviously it was produced prior to that, and it pretty much ultimately coincided with the announcement of intervention. So we've got to take this report in context of that time, and obviously things have moved on significantly since that time. So at the point of release of this report, there was actually discussion with the commissioners about whether to bring this report to committee because of the changing scenario, but it was felt it was important that members understood the service position alongside the Treasury wider impacts and any further impacts from capital loss, etc. But I'll come on to that slightly in a moment. So the key thing at this point was to flag the service pressure in the summary table, which is on the first page of the report, which was 467 million at that point in time. And the Treasury position did reflect anticipated income losses with some of the investments, but it's certainly not by any means the full picture and understanding of that position. So the second figure tells us what we knew at the time, but not beyond that. So that creates a combined pressure, which we then were planning to manage with some reserves, which you can see in the table, but left us still a significant gap and further work to do to address that gap. The point we wanted to concentrate on in this report, therefore, was Table 1, which is on page 42, and the subsequent table beyond that. And that set out the service position we have. We have pressures in adults and children specifically, but if you move on to Table 2, there's then a summary of how those pressures break down. So, and that's then clearly outlined, and there's a detailed appendix which hopefully members have seen and read. But broadly, the categories are there listed. And so as a council, we're facing, as many other councils were facing, aside from intervention and the linked activities, a number of pressures that we were having to meet. That work has continued, and obviously the service pressures are continuing to be monitored. But we always planned, you may remember in the budget, to support our position with reserves, to support it with the use of capital receipts for transformation. And ultimately, it was a year to try and reset the budget from a service perspective and identify further savings, and that work has gone on further. And our NTFS that we were evolving up to this point was very much focused on bringing a balanced budget back next year with less use of reserves, less supporting mechanisms, but still is remaining a huge challenge, and not least because there are continued pressures in the placements, budgets, continued inflationary pressures which have evolved even further since this report, and we're still obviously not clear on things like our funding settlement going into next year. So that's the service position, but I think it's then worth updating members on where we are with the response to the intervention and what we understand to date. And obviously that's an evolving position that we're working with on the commissioners, but there's a further report coming in the next section which sets out the impact of borrowing. So we brought that to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee last week. We've had to transition from very short-term local authority borrowing into a PWLB mechanism. That is obviously coming at a point where interest rates are increasing. We tended to have between 0.5% and 1% borrowing. We're now experiencing from 4.5 to 5% borrowing, and we've got a programme to replace all of our short-term local authority borrowing in response to the intervention. So that report is coming later, but the impact of that report is being assessed and will come back in Q2. There's obviously significant impacts in this year, but obviously as we set an MTFS for next year, we're replacing 836 million by the end of the year, and that is all subject to these interest rate changes. We're doing it on a weekly basis, so we won't know exactly where that falls at the end, but currently it's in that range. So huge pressure there. There's then the minimum revenue provision pressure, which for those members who aren't perhaps clear on minimum revenue provision, it's the method by which we pay back our debt. It's also effectively a proxy for depreciation. So if you have an asset that's got a 10-year life, you would expect to make provision of 10% per year, broadly. Now, with our investment assets, the underlying assumption was provision would only be made to the extent there's a loss. So if the investment continued through to maturity with no loss, you wouldn't make provision because your maturity, return on maturity would pay back your borrowing. Obviously, given the issues we've got specific issues that we're working through that's been reported and in specific asset categories in investments, but also beyond that are very much with our commissioners. The approach to minimum revenue provision is changing. There's new guidance coming, and we are going to be needing to implement wider provision across the whole range of our investments, and that is currently under consideration. And there's a big range of impacts depending on where that discussion goes. At the highest end of the scale, it would essentially mean you write off your assets over their life. So some of our bonds are very short term, some are longer term. Obviously, we haven't been writing off to date. So we need to agree a position with commissioners. And I don't necessarily think it's the worst case scenario that represents in terms of worst case in terms of the impact on our finances, but it's certainly a significant number compared to where we've been previously, which broadly is only provision where required. So that's a significant impact alongside Treasury. And then depending on capital losses, there's the capital loss itself, which obviously attaches to a specific year, and that will depend on when issues occurred within the investment itself, and the audit view of the impact of that will then decide which year that attaches to. They could easily attach to the current open audit year of 2021, and that would almost certainly require support from government, and the mechanism to support the council in that scenario is broadly something called a capitalisation direction. It's effectively borrowing from the government. That would fund the gap. It also gives you the ability to use capital receipts to manage your pressure. But to the extent you can't manage it, borrowing fills the gap. And the borrowing generally is paid back over 20 years as standard capitalisation direction. And there's interest attached to it, which is broadly 1% above normal PWLB rates. So it's kind of a penalty rate of interest on top of the normal rate. So where we've been at 4.9%, it would be 5.9%, for example, that we have to pay. Now that very much, those capitalisation direction rules were set at a point in time. I think it's fair to say there's now several councils experiencing significant problems, Slough, for example, and Croydon. And at the point that guidance was brought in, it was to solve specific, probably shorter term problems of a lower magnitude than perhaps a number of councils are now experiencing. So we very much expect there to be a discussion, and indeed our commissioners include a chief of staff from the department, DLUC, and they're very engaged with us on, one, clarifying the position, two, then working through possible solutions, and then communicating that back to the department and ensuring that the position's fully understood and there's an assessment of the ability to address that as a council, including the time period, presumably the interest rate and the approach to minimum revenue provision. So they're very fluid at the moment, and we're at a stage where we are heading into that conversation with the department, but we haven't got a clear view from them yet on how they'd like to approach it. They want to understand the quantum, and the quantum itself is fluid because there's key things attached to the investments themselves that are still moving, and that particularly relates to the most publicised investment, where the key value of that investment is still not clear, but likely to become clear very shortly. So the overall quantum will crystallise shortly, then the approach can crystallise beyond that, and then we're in a position to have a discussion. I think we're making really good progress in that. It's a really complicated position, because when you bring in the multi-year impacts and how that feeds through to our budgets, it gets extremely sort of technical for local government accounting. But the commissioners are very supportive, and they've also got access to others in the scenarios that are similar, so certainly with Slough specifically, and there's definitely advice available that is supporting us and will enable us to get to a position as quickly and effectively as possible. There's definitely a pressure to then turn that into the series of actions that link into our intervention recommendations, and we are then developing an improvement plan that will be reported back via the Finance Recovery Board, which the leader is part of, as is the acting chief exec, as is the leader of the opposition and the finance portfolio holder. So there's a very engaged member process as part of that, and all the outputs of that will come through the Finance Recovery Board and ultimately lead to reporting back to this group and to the council as a whole. So if I stop there, leader.
Thank you very much. I thought it was worth actually having a very forthright conversation about it. It wasn't an HQQ one. I know we've got the item later on, which I think we can actually deal with it later on, but I think it needs to actually just be open and then know the seriousness and the penalties, and I think we got into a lot of detail there. I think we need to just have in a public. We've all heard that, but I think in as members privately, but I think it's a good time and opportunity to talk about that openly, of how serious the situation is and what we're doing to deliver that recovery board. I must say that it was constructive, the recovery board this week, and it happens bi-weekly now in the boards as we move forward. I think I've found the commissioners in the recovery that very helpful. I think their advice and their consult has been brilliant, and with Essex here we can actually call on other officers of expertise and actually wider conversations, and just like I insisted at the beginning here, ONS, we must use that. The more people to help them decision making, the more easier we're working. It is going to aid us in this recovery plan, but it's not going to be. It's going to be hard, but I think we can. We've got to achieve that for the residents of Thurrock. Any other questions? Luke.
Thank you. I'm going to return to a sort of theme that I raised in the members' briefing, and that is that we don't just have a financial difficulty on our hands. We have a real crisis of confidence around the financial regularity of this council. Now, I joined Cabinet in May 2021, I believe, and during that time I have sat through a series of budget discussions, a series of MTFS discussions, a series of investment briefings, and I now understand that in the whole, much of these briefings was a complete and utter fantasy. And let's be fair, that's where we were. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to get into accusations that will prejudice further investigations or action that will be taken against individuals, because that would be unfair. So let's just talk about perception. Now, I have a perception. Some cabinet members have a perception. Many councillors have a perception. Many residents of Thurrock Council have a perception, and I know that members of the press have a perception that there is a distinct danger that we have been willfully misled at times over the last few years regarding several key financial performance indicators and the investments. Now, I'm sorry that I have to bring this question to you, because my perception of that has greatly improved since meeting yourself, and I'm extremely pleased that the acting chief executive who was chosen is Ian Wake, who's a man who I know working with of absolute integrity and a deep care for public service. So I am somewhat reassured. But how are you, as an officer in, with a Section 151 officer acting, going to restore the trust of people other than myself and the wider Thurrock community that they can actually believe the reports that are delivered on this council's finances?
Thank you, Councillor, and appreciate your comments and absolutely appreciate what you described, because it's not a dissimilar feeling to certainly what myself and the Acting Chief Exec have expressed ourselves to staff and members in the last few weeks. And I think the assurance you can take is it's back to the process we're going through and the support we've got through the wider groups. We've got a detailed review of our governance structures as a whole from the best value inspection. That best value inspection includes, hopefully, the answers to the questions that all members, staff, officers have around investments. I've personally been interviewed in the last hour too. The Acting Chief Exec has also been interviewed, and there's clearly a gap in information between all of us and what's happened, which is not appropriate, not transparent, and has created the scenario we're in. The actions of the intervention, which is the action taken essentially to fix and rebuild that trust, not just in finance, but in members, in officers as a whole, and the council as a whole, is underway, and we are clearly working through those steps to address the issues. The starting point actually is, I think, referencing back to the leader's comments at the start, is actually we've got to fully accept, and our chief inspector was very clear about this on a leadership group call this morning, about we need to get everything out there so that we can move forward, and it's absolutely critical that that happens. And so certainly I know some members have been interviewed already, and any concerns, I think the way he described it was, if you see a crime in the street and you think you should ring 999, ring 999, raise the issue, and anything will be considered, and they are building a very comprehensive picture, not just of the investment activity itself, but of culture, leadership, governance throughout the organisation. And they're talking across the, not just to finance staff, but to members, officers, senior officers, junior officers, and have set up things like the whistleblowing hotline. And everybody accepts, and certainly I accept, but particularly in the finance team, that everybody needs to show that transparency and rebuild trust, because that is literally the only way to do it. I personally have had to take on and understand a huge range of positions in respect to investments in a very short time. I think we've got good advice in place, good advisors in place, but we are going to further support that and make sure that members have the best possible advice they can get around any investment decisions, which will involve invariably members of this committee. And we will then take it from there. We've got positive relationships, all of us across Directors' Board. I certainly can see it in members, and the leadership have engaged positively with the intervention, which is not easy to do, and it hasn't happened elsewhere, and in fact the opposite has happened elsewhere in the examples we're being given and played back, and some feedback back from some of the meetings that have happened centrally where they meet as a group. We are receiving very positive feedback, and we got positive feedback directly from the Finance Recovery Board this week. So I think we've created the best possible starting point we have, but no one underestimates how the scale of the challenge here, and personally it is significant. So we absolutely have to take it step by step. we've got to be really careful not to jump forward too quickly and start moving into the kind of how do we move on and recover. We've got to very much make sure we absolutely accept and understand the full scale of the issue first and the full scale of the problem.
If it's brief.
So I welcome the sentiment there, and not only the practicalities, but I'm also, I'm very happy with what we've seen from the acting leader of the council, and I think we have to be able to guarantee that at no point in this process will either political, financial, reputational or legal expediency interfere with us finding out exactly what has gone on. And I know that we're going to get that from the leader and from this cabinet. And I, having this brief time that I've talked to you, I have confidence that you're of the same mind. So I do welcome that.
Yeah, before I bring Councillor Snelling, I just answer that question because it's an important issue that and I think it's one of the first things I started from was an openness, transparency and honesty. And what that also means, if you look at the peer review this year, it was about how the relationship between myself as leader and the members and the executive team and then the actual officers in the officers team and other members. And I think that I've been trying to make sure, and I think near every day, we're of one. And when we go to a meeting, there's the same thing. You won't be hearing any difference between us. There's an agreement between us. We say the same things. We go to the same meetings. You can ask the same questions to us. That was staff briefings, both of that. For members' briefings, the opposition briefings you've done. We've just tried to make sure that we're... And I know it's horrible being of 49 of councillors as one and trying to deliver for... I'm trying to govern for 49 councillors. I'm trying to govern not for my own group if I get elected tomorrow. And as well as that is to make sure that... we can only get out of this if we're working together as with the senior officer team and throwing apples at each other, the officers, and throwing off, or saying the staff members and throwing it back to the members and saying that may have got us in this position. I don't know. That's for the best value to find out and how we got in that position. Even I've had to sit here and been a member of since 2016. What should I have done? When should I have done? I had my interview and I come out of that and feeling, well, could I have done more? Where should I have said something? Where should I have said something? And it's the actual questions you've got to ask yourself, what you can do, how you got here, what did you do in that place? Because we've all got that, everyone, like all 49, how we went here. And that is an important thing. But I'm confident what the members we've got now, and the cabinet members here, we're sitting here, and the senior team are of the same opinion. And we want to get out it, and we're working to make Thurrock the best it can be. And I want to make sure that Thurrock can still be here, and Thurrock's direction and that is here, so for the residents and the people in this room and the people in our new chamber tomorrow can make the decisions over many years for the sustainability of Thurrock and what he wants to do. And that's my aim, and the one and only aim, as long as I'm here.
Thank you, Leader. I just want to make a couple of things, well, one thing particularly clear. Listen to Councillor Spillman and his talk of perceptions. I understand entirely where that's coming from, and I understand the comments that he made. However, as we go through this process, and particularly as I go through this process, I cannot and will not be bothered with perceptions. I need to know facts, and we can't make decisions on perceptions. As I say, I know where that comes from. And they may well be proven to be very perceptive perceptions, shall we say. But that's not what I can deal with. We need to go through the process. We need to find out exactly what went wrong, who did what, who didn't do what they should have done, and then we'll go from there. And I've said it before in corporate ONS the other night, is that now is not the time for recriminations and playing the blame game. We need to see the facts. We need to see that at the end of this process. Only then can we begin to say what went wrong, and if there is any blame to be laid anywhere, well then maybe we can do that too. So perceptions, we can park that for now, and we'll see what happens at the end of the process. I can't deal with anything else. But the second thing I want to say, and it's relating to opposition members. I feel that we absolutely need the input of opposition members. Otherwise, we just become an echo chamber amongst ourselves. We need the voices from outside of our group to be questioning us, holding us to account properly, turning up at meetings like Councillor Massey has tonight, just to put their point of view across. We need that, I need that. So I would call upon opposition members to make their voices heard as much as possible. Come to see the leader. If they need to come to see me, come to see me. And we can have those conversations, because through those conversations we'll end up making better decisions, and hopefully we'll get to better answers at the end of the process. Thank you.
Yeah, one item you mentioned was in my speech tomorrow night, like about past and future. What I can do, and I reiterate the perceptions, is that the past I can't change the past. We can't change the past. The independent is looking into that. I'm going to wait for their results to make that fact. And the future, it's not in our hands to a extent. But what I can deal with is the here and now, the everyday, and that's what we're doing. So making sure that resident services are delivered. There's still a decision to do that. Making sure we give them many facts as we can, and make sure we work as hard as we can on that recovery board to make sure we got a recovery of this borough. And that's what, and the here and now is what I can do. And I think it was a sermon from last week. I listened to the new investiture, and I know the Bishop of Bradwell said it, and I think I've got to work on the here and now, and I really mean that, and it was really important to me, and I think it's very much like that. We can't deal with the past. Someone else is doing that at the moment, and find out what went wrong. And the future's really is God is going to deal with that, how we're going to, but we can do with the here and now. We can work as hard as we can, day in, day out, and every day. That's what I'm doing, getting here and working day in, day out, and I know that the staff from all levels are doing the same thing, and how proud they are of being in the borough. And as for the opposition members, we've got work to do with opposition members. But I hear their pain over the last 2 years, and over the last few years, and I understand that. And one of the opposition members said, "You hear a lot of talk. You've got to put some actions to it." That's what I've got to do. But I can only do that by day in, day out, proving it to people that they can trust. There's trust back. Bring that trust back, so that I can actually act in what I'm saying. That openness, transparency and honesty. And I've got to build trust for them to see that that's what's happening. And that can only happen by the people in this room, by all my Conservative members, and by the senior officer team. So making sure that they are aware. And every time that I make a decision, as fast as humanly possible, there's mistakes. And I understand that. And I think we're going to make mistakes. We're going to be doing that. But they're not deliberate mistakes. I cannot, please let me believe it. They are mistakes of we're in the last month or so. But we're going to get better. I'm going to get faster. I'm going to make sure that anything I may do, I see good or bad. And I learn to say the bad, because every time we talk good news, let's talk about the bad news, because then the bad news comes with recovery. And that's what I'm going to talk about. You're going to hear me, and that's why I don't speak much. But when I do speak, it's going to be with honesty, integrity and openness and fact. And I'm not going to deal with fiction or putting sugarcoat in it. Any other questions? Thank you very much. I must say before, Jonathan, I think that was helpful tonight. I know it's unusual in Cabinet, and that, but I think it's an unusual situation. I know the Commissioner say this is a unique and innovative intervention. Well, the unique and innovative is that we're thanking them for being here and thanking for the intervention and getting us to a situation and recovery in Thurrock. And I don't look at it as a bad thing. And I thank you for actually giving an honest impression tonight. And it is unusual in Cabinet and the Cabinet member, but I think it was needed. And so we move on then to the next item, which is the close of this business. And I close this meeting. Thank you very much. And we have to have a short pause for the next meeting.